Thank you so much for joining us, Mike. It seems like there was lots of good and less bad in last week's trading session.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of that, followed global markets. Obviously, the big news globally last week was Draghi's comments about the euro and buying bonds, which really, as we've said for months and years now, we need some finality with the euro problem. And I know this isn't finality, but obviously it's a good step to saying this is how hopefully the end game ends up. So what we saw was particularly obviously SA and Namibia obviously track global markets, but what was pleasing was a lot of buying returning to Africa and volumes returning as well. So pleasing on both sides, I think.
Nigeria being the best performer, up 4.58%. We had the banks as well as the consumers. We'll chat about the consumers a little later, but let's talk to the banks. Which were the biggest movers there?
Well, there was a large cross that went through a Union Bank. Now that was all AMCON related. It was an $80 million cross, which is obviously is about 4 times the average daily volume in Nigeria. So that was huge. But like I said, there was a lot of buying interest from foreign participants outside of South Africa. Nigeria is the biggest of the sub-Saharan market, so that's typically the first port of call for a lot of investors, and in that the banks is the biggest sector. I think the banks in total were about 3/4 of the market volume, so a lot of buying demand coming. We saw a limit up for a few days in a row, so yeah, a lot of demand, and it just keeps on coming, which is good.
What's quite interesting, the Zimbabwean Industrial Index up 3.76%, but the mining index down in last week's trading session. I was talking to a guest a few weeks ago just saying that all the results that have been coming out haven't really been reflected on what's going on in the market. The results are positive, but the market seems to be dragged lower.
In the mining, yes. The mining is very difficult to gauge though, because you've got to remember it's only a handful of stocks. So obviously small movements either way can really make a drastic difference. And we saw a massive run up a few weeks ago, and it's been very muted recently. This was down on no specific news. It was just literally some softness in Hwange and Bindura. But yeah, the industrial again, there's the big elephant in the room for Zimbabwe is the political situation, as we all know. But it seems like a lot of participants are getting more and more comfortable. So a lot of buying interest coming, and particularly into the large caps.
What drove the Egyptian market up so high? 2.17%?
Yeah, and again, it was also on good volume, which is pleasing, because the more volume you have, the more you can sort of predict trends. But there was 2 stories. One was the IMF loan, and then there was the investment from Qatar. And obviously the more flow, particularly from foreign, driving into a country, people tend to follow that. So that was the main driver behind the Egypt last week.
We had Kenya, I was saying a little earlier as well, that touched a 14-month high in Friday's trading session. We saw that 350 basis points are cut in interest rates. So a lot of positivity for the consumer, but what about the banks? Likely to suffer on this one?
Yeah, yes, possibly, but I think that's if you're looking at a sector specific. But if you look at a whole, obviously the 3.5%, 350 basis point cut in the rate should mean that there's more demand for equities, particularly from the local funds, which is what we think will happen. So yes, maybe you'll see more demand for consumers over banks, but we think overall for equities we'll hopefully see some demand for the whole market.
So a shift from your fixed income market into your equities. Is that what you're also seeing on the ground there?
Yeah, quite potentially. And I mean, today we saw some really massive volumes in East African breweries. I don't know if you touched on it earlier, but some really big volumes today. So again, the volume's returning, which is really pleasing, because it makes investors more comfortable that if they are in a stock, they can get out of a stock as well. So I think it's pleasing from all aspects.
So the next meeting, the Kenyan central bank is due in November. Do you see them cutting again?
I don't know. I mean, this is obviously a big cut, 350 basis points. It's a really big cut. So I think they'll probably give it a month or two, and obviously it's only in November, so they do have 2 months to decide. I think they'll probably give it a month or so and just see how that's impacted the market before making any final decisions.
BRVM also one of the best performers. So you talk us through that?
Yeah, BRVM is very difficult, because really, if we cut down to it, it's really one stock, and that's Sonatel. So whatever happens in Sonatel, although funny enough, Sonatel wasn't really up last week. I think it was actually flat for the week. There were some small gains in some of the minor names, but there's nothing really there that I would classify as newsworthy, if I was honest.
All right, that's where we have to leave.